Okay, we're doing today's daf Tesvav in Moed Kattan, second daf of Elam Megalchen. Today's daf is pretty much going to be one marathon of we're going to go through basically trying to figure out the halachas of an avel, a menuda, and a mitzaira as it relates to a series of halachas. We were looking to see if various different halachas apply or don't apply to an avel, menuda, or a mitzaira. We had actually started this yesterday on Amid Beis by discussing whether the halachas of an avel and a menuda are noiheg on yontif, during a regel. We had said that by an avel, the halacha is that it's not noiheg beregel. Menuda, it was a machlek, as it seems, between Rav Yosef and Abaye. And a mitzaira we had not yet gotten to. We're going to start from the Gemara 9 lines from the bottom. We're going to start talking about mitzaira, and then we'll move through the other halachas. And as we go through them, we'll review, sure that we understand exactly what the halacha is by each one. Let's start 9 lines from the bottom. The words are mitzaira. Mitzaira mahu sheyinay tzarasi beregel. What's the halacha? Does a mitzaira have a din that the hanhaga of a mitzaira are going to apply even on yantif? And let's see if we can find a raya from the Brayso. Amar Abaye Tashma. Let's look in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says v'hanazer v'hamitzaira ha'oila mitumasa l'tarasai, that if you have a mitzaira who's finishing his tzaras and he's up to the point where he is now nisrape and now he's going to go through the tahara process, the halacha is that at that point he has to shave his entire body. It says in the Mishnah that despite the fact that it's asur to shave or to take a haircut on Chalamaya, this mitzaira is going to have a heter. And l'chura, the reason is because since he couldn't do it before Yontiv, now is the first time he can do it. And therefore, if it's the point where his tahara process says he has to shave his body, now it'll be mutter. What do you see? Habiyamei tum asai noig, that during the time of his tumah, meaning let's say it's the day before, meaning he doesn't have a mitzvah, he doesn't have a chiyuv to shave the rest of his body because he's not yet tahar. It's mashma that he wouldn't be allowed to take a haircut. Why would he not be allowed to take a haircut? If it's mitzad the din of chalamayid, he has no. He couldn't have done it before Yontif because he was an honest. He was already usher to get to shave anything, and it's also davar meforsim that he is a mitzaira. Therefore, he should l'chayra have the heter of the Mishnah. Why does he not have the heter? Elamai must be. You see that the dinim of a mitzaira are noyeg even on chalamayid, and that it's going to be usher for him to take a haircut, to shave his body. So the Gemara says no. La'olam, it could very well be that the dinim of a mitzaira are not noyeg, and that eino chanami, it's mutter for even a regular normal mitzaira to take a haircut, to shave his body, whatever he would want to do. And why is the Mishnah specifically talking about a case where it's a mitzaira ha'olam mitumasai, that he's finished with his process and he's now the tahara process, specifically because there's more of a reason there why I might think that even he will not be allowed to take a haircut. And therefore, I needed to teach the chiddush that he's allowed to. But la'olam, once now I know that both a regular mitzaira and even a mitzaira that is finishing his tumah, that he's oila l'taharasai, is going to be allowed to take a haircut. And the way the Gemara expresses it is as follows: Loimi boya kamar. The Mishnah means to say, I'm teaching you the chiddush specifically by the case of ha'oila mitumasei l'taharasai, because loimi boya, it's pashut biyamei tumasei deloy noyeg, that he's allowed to cut his hair, and that the dinei mitzaira are not going to be noyeg on yontiv, and he'd be allowed to get a haircut. Avla taharasai, I might say nigzer shema yishakar b'naisav, because we know that since once he finishes his tahara process, he has to bring karbanos, and those karbanos are only mutter on chalamayid, but they're asur on yomtiv. The second day is a yontiv. Yom Tov Achron, it's also for him to bring those karbanos. So I might think we'd make a gzeira not to allow him to finish his entire tahara process on chalamayid out of a concern that he might end up bringing his karbanos in yontiv, which is asur. So therefore, I need to teach in the din of the Mishnah that the halach is that he's allowed to get a haircut. He's allowed to finish his tahara process and bring his karbanos. So therefore, Kamash Malon, that's true. But la'olam, you'd have no raya to make a diak that it's dafka when you're finishing your tahara process. Do you have a heter? But beforehand, not. It could la'olam be that even a regular mitzaira would have a din that he's allowed to get a haircut, and the dinim of mitzaira are not noyek. So there's no raya from the Mishnah. However, Zok Rav, bring your raya from the Brayso, and this Brayso's raya will stick. Tashma, the pasuk says v'hatzarua. You read the pasuk inside. It's a pasuk in Vayikra. It says as follows: v'hatzarua asher boya nega, which implies that tzarua is extra. Asher by Hanega tells me everything I need to know about this person. Why are we calling him a tzarua? Must be is an extra detail for a diuk. What's the diuk? L'rabbis kohen gadol to teach me that a kohen gadol could become a mitzayra. Kohen gadol dechol hashana keregel l'kolei al medami. Now, what's the Gemara saying here is that we treat a kohen gadol every day of the year. He's like a walking, talking yontif. Why? Because the avodah that he does is considered like he's always be yontif. Whereas for the rest of us, obviously, it's only yontif when yontif comes. The kohen gadol is going to have that in all year long. And what we're saying is that if he's considered a walking, talking yontif, and he can be noyeg dinei tzaras as a mitzayra, so you see that tzaras is noyeg b'yontif. Now, where do we see that a kohen gadol is considered a walking, talking yontif? The Tanan, there's a Mishnah. What does it say in the Mishnah? Kohen gadol makriv oinen ve'eino oichel. That if a kohen gadol becomes an oinen, meaning he loses someone, one of his krivim, and he becomes an oinen, meaning before the body's put in the ground, he has a din of an oinen, he's bought for mitzvahs, and yet still makriv. He's chayiv to be makriv. He's allowed to be makriv, and why would he be allowed to do that? It must be that the dinei avelus are not noyeg on him because he has a din of a yontiv, just like the normal dinei avelus are not noyeg b'yontiv, like we learned above. So you see that the kohen gadol is considered a walking, talking yontiv, and since he's a yontiv, and yet still the pasuk is telling us that a kohen gadol could be a mitzayra. So if you can have a kohen gadol mitzayra, ipso facto, he could be a mitzayra while he's a walking, talking yontif. So you see, mitzayra is noyeg b'yontif. So from here you have a raya shema mina noyeg tzarasa b'regel shema mina, that even for the rest of us, if someone becomes a mitzayra, the dinei tzaras, the dinei mitzayra, the isur taglachas, and all of the other halachas of a mitzayra are going to be noyeg b'regel, and that tak is the maskana. So let's just point that over here. The first halacha of the day, I believe it's one of 14 halachas, is that we're dealing with whether the dinim of these three people are noyeg b'regel. So the maskana is that an avel, his dinim are not noyeg b'regel. A menuda, it seems it's a machlekes of Yosef and Abaye, and a mitzayra, his dinim are noyeg b'regel. Okay, let's move on to the next halacha, the halacha of taking a haircut. Sakti Gemara. Avel also b'taspeiris, and avel is also to get a haircut on any day. Once he's an avel, he's also b'taspeiris. Now, how do we know that? We get the Kamala Rahman Alibnei Aharon, when Nadav and Avihu died, his sons, meaning Aharon's other sons, Elazar v'Itamar, they were avelim. And what did Hashem say to them? He said, Reishechem al tifra'u, don't allow your hair to grow, meaning what? Get a haircut. What does that imply? That implies that those specifically have are to get a haircut. Michlal, the kula alma aser, everyone else is also to get a haircut. So from here we see that an avel, a normal avel, his din is not to be able to get a haircut. Okay, what about a menuda? What about a mitzayra? Menuda mitzayra mahein b'taspayres tashma menuda mitzayra asurin l'saper l'chabes. So you see, before the Brisa says that a menuda and a mitzayra are also b'taspayres. So therefore, across the board, an avel, a menuda, and a mitzayra are also to get a haircut. The Brisa just continues and finishes off telling us a little bit more about the halachas of a menuda. Person in Nidui, Menuda Shemes, the person who dies and he was never returned to the community, he was died in excommunication. So the halacha is that when they bury him, Bezdin Cycle in a Sarani, they put stones on top of his aron, on top of his casket. Rabbi Yehuda explains that that we put the stones on top of his casket is Lo Sheyamidu Olav Galavonim Kigaloi Shel Achan. It's not as serious, it's not as severe as what we did to Achan. Meaning, Achan, the story was by Yericha, he took the spoils of war, which was against Hashem's wishes, and he eventually was I think he was stoned to death. But the point is that we treated him appropriately by disrespecting his burial by saying that we decided to we put a bunch of stones on top of his aron. By putting a bunch of stones on top of his aron, it was a very severe disrespect to Achan, which was well deserved. So Zakir Yehuda, we're not suggesting that this person who dies benidui is treated to the same severity of Achan, but it is a me'ain of that, rather, Ela Bezdin Sholchan U'Menichin Evan Gedoyla Ala Roinai, L'Lam D'Chashachol HaMisnade U'Meis Beniduyav, Bezdin Circlin Asaroinai. It's a symbolic gesture to say that we want to acknowledge that this person died Beniduyav, which is not a good thing, and therefore a person should always try to get his Nidui mutter, meaning he should go to the Chachamim and try to get it squashed. And the way you do that is by effectively acknowledging that what you did was wrong, by acknowledging that you're going to do tshuva, whatever it is, the reason why you went benidui, you should have to go back to the chachamim. So therefore, what we're saying is that from this brayso, a menuda is going to be also to get a haircut. Continues the Gemara. What about the third halacha? Now we're talking about atifas harosh, which was like a talus that they would put on their heads, cover their eyes all the way down to their lips. Avel chayev be'atifas harosh. She's chayev mitikom leRachmana liYechezkel, because when Kadosh Baruch Hu was talking to Yechezkel in his nevuah about the churban, It said over there that he's going to become an avel, he's going to lose his wife. And when he's noyeg dini avelis, for him, he shouldn't be noyeg dini avelis. It's kedai to read the pasuk inside. Ha'anek doi mesim, avel leisasa. When you become an avel, you shall not be noyeg dini avelis. Pe'er chachavash alecha, we'll see that means you should wear tefillin. Un alecha tasum beraglacha, and you should wear shoes. V'lo sa'ata al safam, and you shall not wrap your face on your lips. And this is going to be what we need for us. And it says, "V'lechem anoshim le'seichel," and the bread of your brethren should not, that they send you, you shouldn't eat. So what does it say in the pasuk? It says over here, "V'lo sa'at al safam" is mechlal the kule on mechayvi. Obviously, if HaKadosh Baruch was picking Yechezkel out to tell him to not do ativas harosh, it's mashma from here that normal avelim would be chayiv in ativas harosh. So therefore, you see an avel is chayiv be'ativas harosh. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu be'ativas harosh. Zot the Gemara Amr Rav Yosef Tashma bring your brisa. It's talking about over here in the Mishnah in Tainus. In the Mishnah in Tainus is talking about where there's a Tainus tzibur because there's no rain, and it got so severe that they would wrap themselves and they would sit kiminudin uke avelim. What do you see? You see that a menuda, a person who's been nidoy, wraps himself in atifas haresh. So Zot Gemara, Zot Rav Yosef, I have a raya from here that a menuda is chayev be'atifas haresh. Abaye says, what's the raya? Dilma menuda l'shemayim shani d'chamer. Maybe that case over there, when Hashem prevents rain, which is like us being benidui, that level of nidui is much more stringent, and therefore maybe the halacha there is you sit b'atifas haresh, but a regular, normal, run-of-the-mill din of nidui, maybe over there the halacha is there is no chiyah b'atifas haresh, so therefore you have no raya. So it comes out that for a menuda, it's a machlekes Rav Yosef and Abaye. What about mitzayir? Mitzayir mahu b'atifas haresh tashma. The pasuk says ve'al sofam ya'ata. The same pasuk. Sorry, not the same pasuk. This is a separate pasuk. This pasuk is a pasuk talking about mitzayir, where it says ve'hatzarua asher bayanega. This is the pasuk we saw earlier. What does it say? It continues in the pasuk and says that begad of yehu ferumim, that you should cut up, you tear kriya. The roisha yehi farua, and his head shall be revealed, open. We'll see what that means. Ve'al sofam ya'ata, and his lips it should be wrapped, meaning you wrap ba'atifas harosh right up onto the lips. So therefore, you see mechlal shechayev ba'atifas harosh mamina. So therefore, atifas harosh and aval is chayev. Machlekes Rav Yosef and Abaye by a menuda, and a mitzayir is also going to be chayev ba'atifas harosh. Okay, what about tefillin? Aval aser laniach tefillin, and aval is aser to wear tefillin. Midikamer le'rachman ali Yechezkel, from when the fact that Hashem spoke to Yechezkel in the nevuah that we mentioned earlier, pe'er chachavash olecha mechlal the kulei alma aser, meaning if he's telling Yechezkel to wear tefillin, it means everyone else shouldn't. So therefore, an aval is aser in tefillin. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu b'tefillin, zot Gemara teku, fine. Mitzayir mahu b'tefillin. What about a mitzayira? Tashma. Let's go back to the same pasuk that we saw just a moment ago, Hatzarua, which we learned before was L'Rabbi's Kohen Gadol. Now, what is that really teaching us? It's teaching us the following. It continues in the pasuk and says, "Begad of Yehiyu ferumim," that his clothing should be sheyehiyu mikurayin, they should be torn. You should tear kriya. So you see a mitzvah tears kriya, meaning even a Kohen Gadol. V'roisho yehiya parua, and his head shall be revealed. What does that mean? Ein piriya elogidol seir divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds that what it means when it says that his head should be open or revealed, it means he should grow hair. That's what Rabbi Eliezer learned. So far we have no raya. The punchline comes from Rabbi Akiva here. Rabbi Akiva oimer nemra havaya beroish. The pasuk says, "Veroisho yihiyeh parua, v'nemra havaya bebeged," where it says begad of yihiyu ferumim. So you have yihiyu, you have yihiyeh, so you have havaya and havaya. We make a hekesh. Ma havaya b'hamura bebeged. When we say that what it means by a beged is we're referring to your clothing, davar shechutz legufay, it's outside your body. Haf havaya berosh. So too, what we mean to say by havaya berosh, that the rosh should be parua, that havaya is also davar shechutz legufay. And what does it mean, my tefillin? So therefore, you'd see over here that it's talking about tefillin. No raya. Maybe it's just talking about a kumsa, a hat, the sudra, a scarf. So you see, a papa and the Stam Gemara are arguing about whether a menuda, sorry, not a menuda, a mitzayir is going to have a din of tefillin. So therefore, we'll leave it over there. So tefillin, it comes out that an aval does not wear tefillin. A menuda, it's a teku. And a mitzayir, it seems also it's not clear. It's a suffix in the Gemara. Okay, what about the halacha of saying shalom aleichem while you are in any one of these three states? Now, how do we know that? So since he refers to him as a silent person, so you see he should not say shalom aleichem. So an aval is also in she'ela shalom. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu b'she'ela shalom. Rav Yosef tashma tzebraisa b'she'ela shalom sheben adam lechaveiroi kivnei adam hanezufin lamokim. This is actually referencing the Mishnah in Tainus, which we saw earlier, and that Mishnah there says where it's talking about a Tainus tzibur. That Tainus tzibur it creates an isser of she'ela shalom, and it's the Isser exists kibnei adam hanezufin l'makam, like a person who's a nidui. So what do you see from here? You see from here that there's a din, there's an Isser she'ela shalom even by nidui. Amalei Abaye no raya. Why? Because what's that referring to? That's dilma menudal shemayim, and menudal shemayim is shani dechamer, like the same answer we answered before. Therefore, it's a machlekes Rabbi Yosef and Abaye whether we'll even say it. Mitzayra mahul b'she'ela shalom. What about a mitzayra? Tashma. The pasuk says ve'al sofam ya'ateh. The ve'al sofam ya'ateh in the pasuk in Vayikra by Hatzarua, it says over there that the Tzarua has a din very simply of al safam ya'ateh. What does it mean? She he used if sosav medubakam zubezu. We dash in the lashon of safam. Safam implies his lips. Why say lips? The double lashon is saying that they should be connected, they shouldn't be opened, meaning what? He should be like a menuda and an avel that is aser b'she'ela shalom shmamina. So we see that a mitzayra has a din that shalom aleichem is going to be aser. Now the Gemara is going to ask, 2 seconds ago you told me that that's a machlekes of Yosef and Abaye by a menuda, whether he's allowed to say shalom aleichem or not, and now you bring a brisa by a mitzayra, comparing the mitzayra being aser to a menuda and an avel. So you see clearly from this brisa that a menuda is aser b'she'ela shalom. So why were Abaye and Rabbi Yosef arguing? Here you have him before brisa, and that's the Gemara's next question. V'nifshek min menuda amar Ravacha bar Pinchas mishmei the Rabbi Yosef no raya. Why? Because if you read the brisa's lashon is she he Yosef sosav medubakam zubezu she yehekim menuda uke'avel. It is like a menuda and avel, and it is aser b'she'ela shalom. Right? Meaning what? Meaning it's not necessarily clear in the brisa that a menuda and an avel are going to be aser. All it's saying is that a mitzayra is similar to a menuda and to an avel in that there are certain restrictions, but not necessarily that it is aser b'she'ela shalom. The Isser She'ela Shalom is only being said by a Mitzayra, not by a Menuda, and that's what the Gemara says. Mikitani Sha'aser? No. She'yehei kimenuda ika'avel kitani b'mili achranai. So maybe it's just referring to other things, but Aser Nami b'She'ela Shalom, which will only apply to a Mitzayra and not necessarily to a Menuda, so Memela you don't have a Raya. So in summary, Shalom Aleichem is Aser by an Avel, by a Menuda it's a Shaila, and by a Mitzayra it's going to be Aser. Okay, let's talk about learning Torah. Avel Aser b'divrei Torah, and Avel is not allowed to learn Torah mitikam rachman aliyah cheskul doim. Nice and simple. Meaning, no learning Torah for a novel. What about a menuda? Menuda ma'u b'divrei Torah. Is he allowed to learn Torah? Amar Rav Yosef. I'll answer very simple. There's a brisa tashma. Menuda, a person who is in nidui, shoyne v'shoyne loy. He's allowed to learn b'chavrusa, and he's allowed to be taught by other people. Nischar, he is allowed to be employed. He's allowed to work for someone. V'nischarin loy, and he can employ others. However, muchram, if he goes to the more severe type of nidui, which is called chayrim, then the halach is loy shayna. There is no chavrusa learning, but loy shayna loy, and there's no teaching him. Rather, and not only that, loy nischar loy nischarin loy. He can't work for someone else, and he can't hire other people. Aval shona hu la'atzma. He is allowed, of course, to learn to himself, because we're not going to say chas shalom that he's going to yoshe batal for the entire time. Shelo yafsik es limudo, in order to not stop learning. And you have to understand why is that true there, not by a novel. But okay, we'll discuss that at a different point, maybe. However, what does it contain the halacha of this person in chayrin v'oisel lechanos katana b'shvil parnasa? So we don't want him to go broke, so we allow him to have a shtickle parnasa, but not much. What do we tell him to do? V'amarav, an example would be zvunei maya bepikta the arvas. He sells water in the shuk in arvas, meaning he stands on the side of the road selling water to cars at the stoplight. The point is that we don't give him big parnasa, but we tell him to go do a little parnasa. Shmami no, but the point is from this entire brayso, you do see that a menuda is chayiv in Talmud Torah, and avada the halacha is he's allowed to learn. Mitzayra mahu b'divrei Torah tashma v'hidatam levanecha livnei banecha. You shall teach your children and to your children's children. Yoyim asher amat lifnei Hashem lokecha b'chayir, the day you stood on Har Sinai in front of Hashem. And what do we learn from this brayso? Ma'alahalon, just like over there in that story of us receiving the Torah. When we stood and received the Torah, it was be'ema u'biyira u'bireses u'bizeya. It was with awe and fear and sweat and shaking. And the point is that what we were not in a very comfortable matzah. Mikan Omer, you see that it's not required that you be b'shalva and b'sheket and b'simcha. It's nothing wrong with learning Torah and being given Torah when you're in that type of a state. So we learn from there hazav in a person who's a zav, which only comes from chet. V'hamitzira in a person who's a mitzayra, which comes from chet. Ubayalei nidas in a person who's bayal nidas, which is avada chet. All of these three people, despite the fact that they are obviously not doing the right thing in their life, the halacha is still mutar in the course of Torah. They're allowed to learn Torah. Univim, uksuvim, ulishnas medrash. They're allowed to learn medrash, ubishas and mishnayos, ubahalachis and gemara, ubaagadis and musar, right? And the halachis about that they're allowed to learn Torah. So what do you see? You see a mitzayra is allowed to learn Torah. Ubalei karen. However, if it's about balkari is a different story. there he's also to learn Torah. But Shema Mina, in terms of our question about learning Torah, it's going to be mutter for a mitzayra to learn Torah. So when it comes to Torah, then aval is aser, but a menuda and a mitzayra are allowed to. And of course, once you're allowed to, the halacha is you're chayiv to. Okay, let's move on. We're now talking about laundering. Laundering, when you're an aval aser b'tach baises. An aval is also b'tach baises, like the pasuk says. The pasuk in Shmuel Aleph, it says v'yishlach Yoav. Yoav sent out Tkua in the place of Tkua. V'yikach misham isha chachma. He found a smart a smart woman, and he said to her, "Hisablina, mourn for me, or mourn v'livshina bigdi avel, and wear bigdi avel, v'altesuche shemen, and don't anoint yourself with oil, v'chayis kiisha ze yomim rabim misabelas almeis, and you will do this for many days, mourning on the death of a person." So what do you see? You see that we're referring to the clothing that is to be worn when you're in Avelis as Big Day Avel. The implication, of course, is that you're not cleaning it, because otherwise you would just be regular begadim. If there are special begadim for for an Avel, obviously it means they're not being cleaned, which therefore teaches us that an Avel is aser b'tachbaisis with aser in laundry. What about a menuda and a mitzvah? A menuda and a mitzvah in mahim b'tachbaisis. Tashma menudin u'mitzirayin asurin l'saper u'lechabesh mamina. Mefurish braysa that you're not allowed to do it, and therefore we see from here that when it comes to laundry, when it comes to cleaning, both avel, menuda, and mitzvah, all three are going to be aser. Okay, what about tearing kriya? Right, is tearing kriya something that any one of these people are chayiv to do or not? Avel chayiv b'kriya de'kamru rachman b'nei Aharon, like we saw what was said to Itamar and Elazar when Nadav and Avihu died and they became Avelim. It said that Hashem said to them, Loi sifroimoi, right, which means what? Don't tear. Michlal, the kuli alma mechayvi. The diak is that if he was obviously telling them not to do it, it means the rest of the people would be chayiv b'kriya, and therefore you see from there that an avol is chayiv b'kriya. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu b'kriya. Sorry, b'kriya take what the Gemara says. You have no raya, teiku, we don't have an answer. Our second teiku of the day, that a menuda, it's not clear if he has a chiyuv to do kriya or not. What about a mitzayra? Mitzayra mahu b'kriya tashma. Begadav yehihu ferumim. The pasuk we saw earlier of Hatzorua Asher Bayanega, it said begadav yehihu ferumim, that his clothing shall be ferumim. Shehiyu mikuroy and shmamina. You see that there's a din kriya, a din of tearing kriya by a mitzayra. So when it comes to tearing kriya, an aval does tear kriya, a menuda it's a teku, and a mitzayra does tear kriya. Okay, what about the next halacha of kfiyas hamita? They used to turn over their beds. Aval chayiv b'kfiyas hamita. An aval is chayiv in kfiyas hamita. Now, why do we turn over the beds for an aval? And the reason is because the Tani Bar Kapara taught the following halacha, the following idea: the musti yuknei nasati behen. Rashi says over here, "B'tzelem elokim as Adam." Right, since man was created in the image of God, and because of their chatoyim hafachtiha, and death came to the world only because of their avainis, and death is referred to as hafachtiha. You turned it over, you flipped it around, you did the opposite. Therefore, when someone dies, which clearly is on some level brought into the world to do the chet, therefore you should turn the bed over and in mourning lie on the opposite side of the bed. So therefore an aval is chayv b'kfiyas amita. What about a menuda? What about a mitzayra? Menuda mitzayra mahin b'kfiyas amita. The Gemara says that's a teku, a double teku. So for kfiyas amita, it's naig by an aval and not by a menuda and a mitzayra. Avel aser b'asiyas malacha. This is the next question. Do we say these three people are aser to do malacha or not? So it says over here that an avel is aser b'malacha. The pasuk says, "V'hafachti chageichem la'evel," that I turned their chagim, their yontiv, into an evel. So you make a hekesh of chag to evel. Ma chag aser b'malacha. Just like we know on yontiv and on chalomei, there is some level of an iser malacha. Af avel aser b'malacha. So therefore you see an avel is aser b'malacha. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu be'asiyas malacha. Amr Rav Yosef tashma. We know the Mishnah that we learned in Tainus set that Kisha Amru Asr B'Asiyas Malacha, when it said in that Mishnah over there that it's Asr B'Asiyas Malacha during that Tainus Tibur when it's not raining, and they're davening that it should rain. So in order to be Ma'ira Rachmei Shemayim, they answered themselves from doing Malacha. Like Amru Ala B'Yayim, that Isra Malacha is only by day of Abalayla Mutter, but during the nighttime it's Mutter. V'chein ata moitze b'menuda ube'avel, and that's the key line here. You see that we refer to the day of that tiny stibur where there's an Isser Malacha, and we refer to it as the same as if he's a Menuda or he's an Ovel. So what do you see? My lava kulu, is that not obviously referring to both the other halachas as well of the Mishnah, which will include even asiyas melacha. The Gemara says lo ashara, not a raya, and therefore you don't have a raya whether is going to be an iser melacha of a menuda. However, Gemara says Tashma. I have a separate brisa, and this brisa is taka raya. It says menuda shayna v'shayna loy. A menuda is allowed to learn and he's allowed to be taught. Nischar v'nischarin lo. He is allowed to work and he's allowed to employ others. So what do you see? Shmami know that he is allowed to do malacha. Therefore, a menuda is allowed to do malacha. Masha'ein kin an aval, which we said before, he would not be allowed to do malacha. Ask the Gemara, what about a mitzayra? Nice and simple. Mitzayra mahu ba'asiyas malacha. The Gemara says teku. Okay, fine. That's asiyas malacha. What about bathing? Rechitza, is bathing mutter for these three people. Aval asur b'rechitza, and aval is not allowed to do bathing. The pasuk says v'al tesuche shemen. We're referring to the din before of was that Yoav? I forgot already. That was Yoav. Yoav said to her, "I want you to act as an avel." And what did he say to her? And don't anoint yourself with oil. And we know that when someone says sicha, it also includes rechitza. So therefore, he was telling her, don't anoint, which meant don't do rechitza. So you see that an avel is also berechitza. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu berechitza. Is a menuda allowed to do rechitza? Rav Yosef Tashma. Go back to the Mishnah in Tainus. Kisha amru also berechitza. When they said over there that on the Tainus Tibra, a person is not allowed to do rechitza. Loi amru ela kol gufay. It meant you can't wash your whole body. But if you're going to do the rest of your face, your hands, and your legs, that'll be mutter. So you see that the Mishnah over there is referring to the Isser Rechitza, and it seems it's referring to it in a way that just like the person who's B'tainis Tibur is considered Benidoi, so too will have the same din. So we see from here, my lava kulu, that a person who's Benidoi is going to have an Isser Rechitza. Gemara says, no, loy ashar, it's going on the other malachos in that Mishnah. And lav da'avka, is it referring to rechitza? Therefore, you don't have a raya by rechitza being mutter or asur by a menuda. But zok the Gemara, what about a mitzayra? Zok the Gemara, mitzayra ma'u berechitza, and the Gemara says teku, another teku for rechitza. Now let's move on to ni'ila. Well, first let's review. Rechitza is asur by a novel. Seems it's machlek between Rav Yosef and the stam of the Gemara by a menuda, and by a mitzayra it's going to be a teku. What about the halacha of ni'ila sasandal? Do you have to take off your shoe? Are you allowed to wear regular normal shoes as an avil menuda or a mitzayra? So the Gemara says avil also b'nilas. A sandal is also to wear what we'll call leather shoes. Now, how do we know that? Back to the well again from Yecheskel. What did it say over there? It said in the pasuk that uniquely Yecheskel is v'na'alecha tasim b'raglecha, should wear shoes. Everyone else obviously is not supposed to wear those shoes. So you see that an avel is aser. Beni'ila sasandal. What about a menuda? Menuda mahu beni'ila sasandal. And Rav Yosef says, let's go back to Tainus Tibur. Tashma, it says, Kisha amru, when it said in the Mishnah over there that it's also beni'ila sasandal. Loy amru ela be'ir, aval b'derech mutter, it's only in the city, but if he's on a trip, he'd be allowed to put shoes on. Haketzad, exactly, how does that work? Yatzal derech, when he goes out for a trip, when he's leaving the city, noyel, he could put his shoes on. Nichnas le'ir, when he comes back to the city, before he gets in, let's take them off. And it says over there in the Brisa that the Mishnah's dinim are v'chena tamoitz b'menuda ba'avel, saying that those dinim apply to a menuda and to an avel. My lavakulu, is that obviously not going on everything listed in the Mishnah, which would then of course include the Isser Ni'ila Sasandal, and therefore from here we could place it the Shaila Zat Gemara. No, loy asha'ara. It's going on the other things, and therefore you don't have a raya by a menuda about Ni'ila Sasandal. Okay, what about a mitzayra? Again, Nachamal mitzayra mahu b'Ni'ila Sasandal. That's a teku. So to review the halachas of Ni'ila Sasandal, an avel is aser b'Ni'ila Sasandal. Menuda, it's a machlekes between Rav Yosef and the stam of the Gemara. And for a mitzayra, it seems it's a teku. Okay, what about the next halacha, second to last one of the daf? Bia tashmish amita. Is it mutter or aser during any one of these three phases? Of also b'tash shamita, it says that a person who's in mourning is also b'tash shamita, and that's learned out from the following story. The Chsiv, the pasuk says by David Melech and Bathsheba that Yenachem David as Bathsheba ishtay uviyavay aleh. It seems that the tashmish only happened after the nechama. The story over there was that David and Bathsheba, when they got married, they had a child. The child died, and Bathsheba became an avel. And it was only after that avelus was finished did David Melech then have bia and tashmish again, and that actually brought about Shlomo Melech. So what do you see? Mechlal demi kara, that before he was menachem, before the avelus was over, it was aser b'tashmish shamita. So from there we learned that an ovel is aser b'tashmish. Okay, what about a menuda? Menuda mahu b'tashmish shamita. Rav Yosef Nacham al tashma kol osen shanam sheyu Yisrael ben Midmar menudin haya. We learned earlier that for all of the years that Klal Yisrael were in the Midbar, we know that they were considered menudin. the shimshu mitayse, and yet they had children, they had tashmish. So what do you see? You see a menuda is mutter and tashmish. Amalei Abaye, don't bring me a raya from the nidui of Klal Yisrael with Hashem, of Klal Yisrael. Why? Because nidui shemayim is different. Amalei Abaye, but dilma menuda l'shemayim shani, to kill. Meaning maybe the raya from nidui shemayim is not, there's no raya. You want to bring me a raya that the nidui of Klal Yisrael and the Midbar, that they were mutter b'tashmish, maybe that nidui was a much lighter level of nidui, whereas the nidui between a person and Bezdin, and in a real case of nidui is more chamer, and you have no raya. Maybe there'd be an isur tashmish. So now Rav Yosef is bothered. I don't understand. Kill the ha'amris chamer. 2 seconds ago on Amud Aleph, a couple of times already, you told me that I can't learn out from a nidui of shemayim because it's so severe that you can't bring me a raya that there's an isur from there to a regular case of nidui, and now you're telling me that it's kal. Which one is it? Make up your mind. Gemara says, Abaye answers, Sifuke misapkele. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's more kal. I don't know if it's more chamer. So therefore, since I have a suffix about which one it is, in either direction you go, zil hacha, if you ask me if it should be a chumrah, kimadachile, I'll tell you it's too kal. Bezil hacha, and if you try to say it's a kula, kimadachile, I'll tell you, no, it's too chamer. You can't compare the two, and so therefore, you can't learn out from nidui shemayim, and so therefore, by a menuda, you're not going to have a raya one way or the other about tashmish. Okay, fine. What about a mitzayra? A mitzayra mahu b'tashmish hamita. This is actually a discussion we had a little bit earlier in the Gemara. We're going to keep it simple over here and say the following: Tashma, the time the Brisa says pasuk v'yosh michutz la'ahaloi, that after the mitzayra comes back from his tahara process, he then returns michutz la'ahaloi, from outside his oil, which means that she yehei kimenuda uke'avel, he shall be like a menuda and an avel. The aser b'tashmish hamita, and it would be aser b'tashmish hamita. And how do you see that? Because the pasuk says v'yashav michutz la'ahaloi, from outside his oil, v'ein ahaloi ela ishtoi, which means he's returning to his wife b'tashmish. Shenamar, how do I know that the oil means ishtoi? Shenamar, by Har Sinai it says, that Klal Yisrael we're told, leich emor lahem, go tell Klal Yisrael, shuvu lochem la'ahalechem, to go back to your oilim, which means to go back to your wives, because they were aser b'tashmish hamita, calls man that they were by Har Sinai. Shema, you see from here that a mitzayra is going to be aser b'tashmish hamita. We're not being mechalik here between a mitzayra muchlat and a musker. I showed the Gemara earlier in the Masechta, but for our purposes, you see that a mitzayra is going to be aser b'tashmish hamita. Now, ask the Gemara a very similar question to what we saw earlier. Is I just brought a brisa that seemed to imply that the dinim of a mitzayra are going to be aser b'tashmish hamita, and it compared it to a menuda. And yet, before 2 seconds ago, by a menuda, we weren't sure whether the din tashmish is going to be mutter or aser. Why not use this brisa gufa to teach me that by a menuda, the halacha is going to be an issa tash shamita? Rav Huna breder Rav Pinchas mishmeder Rav Yosef. No, miktani she'aser. Does it actually say in the brisa that a menuda is aser and tashmish? No. All it says is that sheyehei kimenuda uke'ovel b'mili achrani. So all it's saying is that a mitzayra should be like a menuda, like an ovel, b'mili achrnisa in many areas, but lav dafka necessarily exactly the same as it is concerning tashmish. V'aser, and a mitzayra is also aser nami b'tashmish hamita, which has nothing to do with the menuda, meaning there's no raya, and therefore the maskana, at least as it pertains to tashmish, an ovel is aser, a menuda it's not sure, it's Rav Yosef and Abaye, and a mitzayra is going to be aser b'tashmish hamita. Last halacha, the halacha of whether you're allowed to be shaleach karbonai, so you're allowed to send the carbon, meaning we know for sure that a mitzayra can't do a carbon in the base of English because he's not allowed to go in the base of English, he's tamei. But what about, can he send with a shliach his animal to the base of English to be brought on his behalf? Zot Gemara, Avel einoi mishaleach karbonos, if he's not allowed to send a carbon. The Tanya the Brisa says Reb Shimon Oimer Shlomim Bizman Shu Shalom. Why is it called a Shlomim? Dafka when you're Shalom, when you're complete, but Loi Bizman Shu Oinen, and not when you're in this quasi-complete status where you're an Oinen, meaning you're an Aval, and therefore an Aval is usher to send the carbon. Okay, what about a Menuda? Menuda Mahu Sheyishlach Korban Noisav. Rav Yosef Tashma, same Brisa we saw earlier, Kol Osan Shanim Sheyahayu Yisrael. B'midbar menudin hayu. We know that they were considered in nidui when they were in the midbar, and yet still v'shal karbanis, and they did karbanis. Amarle Abaye says there's no raya. Same dichoy that we've been having all daf. Dilma menudil l'shemayim shani. Maybe the din nidui when it's a nidui l'shemayim, which is what was happening in the midbar. Maybe you can't bring me a raya. Maybe the reason why it was mutter for them to do karbanis is to kill. Fred the Gemara, Fred Rav Yosef, what do you mean to kill? You've been telling me all day on Aman Aleph that it's chamir, kill, v'ha'amrit chamir. So he says the same answer we said before, sifuki misapkele. He says, I'm not sure, and therefore midachile, therefore no matter which way you go, I'm going to tell you can't bring a raya from nidei shemayim, la'olam, the din of menuda is going to be a machlekes Rav Yosef and Abaye, whether a person could be shaleach karbanas. The last din of the day, what about a mitzayra? Mitzayra, mahu sheyishlach karbanosav. We're going to learn from the Brisa, the short story over here is that the halacha is it's going to be asur for mitzayir to be shalech karbanis, and it's going to be learned out from a shtickle yitur hakra by Tumas Hameis, where it says that a kohen gadol, the Tanya, the Brisa says v'achrei taharasa, after the kohen gadol who is tamei Tumas Hameis, it becomes tahar, he's allowed to go ahead and do the avoid again. The Gemara Brisa here darshans the pasuk a little bit andrish. V'achrei taharasa does not mean after he becomes tahar, rather it means v'achrei taharasa, acher prishase min hameis. After he stops being in contact with the mace, either in the house or touching the mace, the pasuk then says shivas yamim. There should be a 7-day wait, and that 7-day wait is followed by a yisperulai. What's the yisperulai? The yisperulai was a little extra. Since it's extra, we understand it to mean elu zayin yemei sefirai, meaning it's referencing a mitzayir. This how Rashi over here learns. Rashi in the Ksav Yad learns a little bit different. And other Rishonim have a different mahalach. But the point is that there's a drush from the pasuk that you see that this kohen gadol isn't only tamei tumas mace, he's also tamei tumas mitzayira. And what the pasuk is saying in the next pasuk is ubiyoim bo el hakodesh, and on the day he comes back to the Beis Hamikdash el hachatzer hapnimis, inside the chatzer l'sharis b'kodesh, to serve in the kodesh. Yakriv chatasa, he brings a carbon chatas, which is understood to be referring to the minchas chavitin zu asiris ha'efeshali. So what do you see? It's only at that point in time when he becomes completely tahar from both his tumas mace and his tumas saras that he's allowed to go do the minchas chavitin. Why didn't he just send his minchas chavitin during the time that he was outside when he was as a mitzayra? You see from here that a mitzayra is aser to be sheleach karbanis, and div Rebbe Yehuda. This is the sheet of Rebbe Yehuda, and Reb Shimon is not chaylik on the etzem din. He's maskim that the din of a kohen gadol not sending his minchas chavitin is also true, but he understands the drasha slightly different. He actually understands the first part of the pasuk of Achrei Taharasoi Yisapruloi Shivas Yomim Misapruloi is not referring to Mitzayra at all. It's just a simple drasha. It comes from the fact that in the second pasuk it says Ubiyoim Ba'oi El HaKodesh. So there's a lashon of Bia, and the pasuk finishes off with Yakriv Chatasai. So you see that there's a juxtaposition of Bia and Hakrava. Reb Shimon Omer B'Boya Yakriv. That drasha, that hekesh tells me Bisman Shiroy LeBia, when he's allowed to come in, meaning when he's not tamei, meaning if he's a mitzayir, he's not going to be allowed to come in. Roy lahakrava, it's only at that time that he's allowed to come in. Bisman she'ena roy labia, if he's tamei as a mitzayir, he wouldn't be allowed to go in. Eino roy lahakrava, so therefore a mitzayir, according to Reb Shimon and according to Reb Yehuda, is going to be usher to be sheleach karbanis. Lamaskana, what we're saying is that sending a carbon for an avel is usher. Rav Yosef and Abaya are going to argue by a menuda, and by a mitzayra that's going to be usher as well. We'll stop over here. We'll pick up from here tomorrow. It's Hashem Daf Tezayin Amud Aleph, continuing in Perek Elu Megalchen. Shkoyach.